Hello and welcome back to the Genesis Designs and Modelcraft bench, here with the Zvezda SU-57 again, and in this video, part 2, we're going to look at colouring this beast in. So from the last time you saw this in the build phases, all the rest of the little bits and pieces were finished off that needed to be done, and I was left with, I wouldn't say a patchwork finish of colours, but there was various differences in colour here and there. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be an issue, but because the colour that's going to be covering most of this is so pale, I felt that some form of colour unification was justified. Some might say priming. What I've used here to prime this isn't primer. I didn't want to add the, shall I say, depth of paint that actual primer or stuff that's sold as primer would give. So what I've used is a Tamiya spray can of colour, in this case AS18, which is IJA light grey. Completely random colour. I get now and again, Vince at modelsforsale.com will offer me little job lots of old stock of stuff like this for reasonable prices, and I'll quite often take him up on it for precisely this reason. This can be used for exactly this sort of job, and this is quite a nice neutral colour. So that was decanted into my airbrush. Where's my decanteroo? I'll quickly show you how, for those that have never done this before. Don't just spray it straight into your airbrush cup, because most of it will go in your face. Because it just bounces straight back out of the cup and straight back at you. What I've got here is the end of a pipette. These type of pipettes are cheap, easily available on eBay. Use them for picking up thinners and what have you. So I cut the tapered end off, and I've actually cut a slight circle into it so that it will press quite happily onto that spout, that sticky out bit of the spout there. It just pops onto that, no problem at all, and it'll sit there, and you don't need to tape it on or anything silly like that. And then just to extend that further, I've got an ordinary drinking straw, a plastic drinking straw, and because of this taper you can just push that on, and you've got a nice long spout, and literally just put that in your airbrush cup and in it goes, and put as much as you need in. I did then add a little Mr. Colour thinner, because to go through the airbrush this is a little bit on the heavy side, and I've sprayed the entire model with that paint, with the result that it looks exactly like it's just plastic again. Now once I've done that, you can probably see the queer reflections there. The reason you can see those is that this has been smoothed. I would sanded down, flatted down. I like to use the term flatted, that is the correct term, just to remove any of the little, because it's such a large model and sprayed the whole thing, that you're bound to get little bits of sort of fabric fibres and things will fly into it, because that's what they do. So to get rid of that, I've used the Trizact. I'll put this here so you can see it. This is 3M Trizact 3000 grit sponge back sanding pad. This is a 6-inch sanding pad designed for use on a dual orbital sander or similar. It's got velcro on the back, and what I do is I cut small pieces off like this, and I use these independently. It's important. Now I did in one of my much earlier live casts on YouTube, I've mentioned this before with reference to gloss finishes, and had a few complaints, and I've seen a few on other people's channels that have also mentioned this stuff about how it scratched the heck out of the paint. Now that isn't going to scratch anything. You couldn't even scratch your eyeball with this. It's very smooth. This, however, different story. If you cut off a piece of the pad, and this is all I do, is just nibble my way around the edge and leave that backing on, it's quite sharp and it will take chunks out of your model if you're not careful, out of your finish, but it will peel off if you're careful. As you can see, it's quite a good glue, it doesn't peel off easily, but especially after it's been in water a few times it will peel off. Now if you have a newer pad, this pad in fairness is a few years old now, and the backing won't come off, then the other option is get your scissors and go at an angle like so, and it just teases back that velcroed plastic away from the edge of your pad, so you're less likely to catch these corners, quite especially when you say sanding something like this detail here and you're sanding along the edge there and the corner's busy taking lumps out of the paint over here where you're not looking. So yeah, just get scissors at an angle. If it's not a precise angle, guys, 38 degrees, there you go, and cut that backing pad away like so, just to give yourself that little margin. But if you can peel this backing off completely, then do so. Anyway, I digress. Back to what I was saying. So this has all been flatted with Trizact and water, and it's beautiful and smooth, and it's ready to roll, which leads us on to the colours. So clear the decks a little bit. Zvezda give you a couple of options on the colours with this kit. You've got this grey on grey version. There's a couple of versions in fact here, 01 and 511. Of the two, this is the nicer one as it's got the blue codes. It looks a bit prettier to my eyes. Then on the other side, 509, the 8th flight prototype, much nicer to look at. I think it's pale blue with a darker blue grey over the top. Zvezda's recommendations for these colours are XF18 and XF23. This is XF23. I don't have XF18, but I think it's a sort of an intermediate blue shade. So I approached Google with a request for SU-57 photographs, specifically 509, and I'll show you this one. There's a few. It's not there aren't millions of photos of these things out there, but there's a few. So straight away, I'm thinking, nah, I don't like this for the pale blue at all. It's too dark, it's too green, it's not blue enough. This darker colour, straight away I was minded of extra dark sea grey. Some may disagree, and it does look quite purple on the monitor of the video camera, but on my phone screen that bears a striking resemblance to extra dark sea grey, and it's certainly close enough for me. So I went ahead and I mixed my own colours, and I'll just take you through those. I think what I'll do is I'll put the recipes in the video description for posterity, to save people flicking through the video if they want to try mixing these themselves. So my blue colour has ended up being this, mixed in an old clear jar. I tend to keep especially the X22 jars, I get through a few and I tend to keep them because they're easy to clean out, and I use them for mixing colours in all the time. And this colour, I'm not going to lie, it was quite circuitous getting to it. So what we've got in there, it's based on white and XF23, a lot of white and a bit of XF23. Now to make it the blue side of it a bit brighter, I've added some X4, and that looked quite nice, but it didn't quite have a clean enough appearance to the blue, so I actually added a bit of this, which is a colour I mixed up to do C130 in the JSDF colours, and this is also based on XF23 in white. There you go, there's your colour. But this is quite a, it does look on the video, it looks like a decent match for the jet in question, but it's a bit too violet, and that's because it contains azure blue, RF azure blue. But I put a bit of this into here, so it's brighter and paler than what I'd mixed, and that's given me this colour. See, you can see how the one on the right is much more, a bit more violet. So that's my blue colour. So just to reiterate, that is XF2 and XF23 with a touch of X4 to blueify it, and a little touch of azure blue just to crisp it up a little bit, and that's what I'm going to use. The grey colour, I said it looked like extra dark sea grey, so I've got extra dark sea grey, but what I've done with this is I've added a little dark sea grey just to pull it back, bring it up a bit of a paler shade. I do think, in fairness, that the Mr. Hobby Extra Dark Sea Grey is a bit too dark anyway. Not that it needs to be extra dark sea grey in this case, but I've just knocked back the depth of it a little bit with some dark sea grey. And the next step from there, so I've got my two main colours somewhere near what I think I want them. And then the next obvious and sensible step from there is to test it. So I've used one of the tail planes, one of the fins from the kit, and I have indeed sprayed it. So this is my pale blue mix first off, then my grey mix in the middle, and then for the fin cap I think you can possibly just tell that that's a slightly different colour. I've sprayed it first with XF23, which is significantly darker, as you can see here, and then oversprayed that with a light coat of this colour, which has left me with this slightly paler but distinctly off shade version of the main colour for the fin cap, which you can maybe... subtle, I know, but the real thing is, so there you go. So that proves the concept. I think my pale blue is possibly a bit darker than the real aircraft, but the trouble you have with trying to match colours using photographs is a perfectly valid thing to do, and you need to think about it when working with models to get the colours to look right. But I think if my blue were as pale as the real thing appears, and if the grey were as dark, it would look quite wrong in model form, and that's the thing, you have to try and find a compromise so that you achieve the right appearance. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely accurate, it just needs to look it, if that makes sense. And I think that is somewhere near, and we can slightly massage some of the tones with oil paints later if we feel the need, but I think for what I'm doing here that's probably close enough. Maybe I'll add a little more white to the mix and just brighten it up a touch more yet. This is the inside of the right hand tail fin, so it's not going to be too much of an issue. So yeah, that's where I'm at the minute. I'm ready now to start applying some of this pale blue on the main model, which I'm not going to show you me spraying that because it's going to be very dull, but I'll be back presently and we'll talk about the masks and using those. Okay then, after a little bit more experimentation with the colour, I have got the blue now on the most of the airframe, which, yeah, it covers up most of it. The mixture in the end, I did add a bit more white to it just to lighten it up a little more from where it was when I showed you it in the previous part. But the mixture is still the same. I didn't add any different colours, just some white. The radome here, I've masked that off and sprayed that in yet a lighter tone still to match photographs. There are other areas of the aircraft that have different coloured panels, and a really obvious one is these panels on the nose are slightly different colour, but they're not going to interfere with the masking job that we're about to do, so I've left that for now. So once I got full coverage here, there's about 3 coats of paint. I have again used that Trizac pad, you can see the shine on it. I've used that Trizac pad just to smooth the surface off, again take out any errant little pieces of fabric and what have you, and also, quite importantly actually, just smoothed in any of the overspray across here where I've not painted. This area will be the darker colour, so there was no need to paint it. And obviously the underside, I've done the same thing, just smoothed it, but there will be no digital pattern going onto here. Looking at photos, there is some dirt I can put on here, but shading and differential panel colour wise there's not really anything going on underneath, so that's how it's going to stay, frankly. Okay, anywho, I've done some more testing with the masks. This is the fin that I started with. Now I went back over this with the lighter colour. You can see that the fin cap is still a different colour. but very, very subtly so, and that does reflect the real aircraft. And then I've used the mask and put the patterns in with my extra dark sea grey mixture. And I've also done one of the elevators, and this is just to check the usage of the mask to make sure they're not going to pull paint off, all that kind of thing. On a small part that if I had a mare and pulled paint off here, it's going to be easy to fix, but just proves the concept basically before attacking the main hulk of the model. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to start applying some of these masks to the main model so that you can see. This is an anti-static brush, get these little bits of fluff off. These are great, by the way. This is a Tamiya anti-static brush. It's super soft. It's really brilliant for cleaning and dusting your models. I'm quite doubtful as to the efficacy of the anti-static part, but whatever. So, masking sheet. Now what I've done, I've with a pencil written on it to say which is which parts wise, just to save constantly referring to this. I know I need mask number 3 for this right hand wing, which is this one. So I'm going to pop this off the sheet. Now this is a massive mask, it's the length of the sheet, so what I'm going to do to avoid tearing it, if possible, because there's a tendency with all of these sharp corners, especially if you just yank it off, for the mask to just start to kind of tear in the edges. So I'm going to put a bit of tape just across some of this to help hold everything in place. And we'll pull this off once it's on the model. Right, let's see how that's going to work. Yeah, that's happening. There's a bit here where it's not quite pulling off easily. There we go. Just areas like that in particular, the tape just helps all of these shapes to stay in place relatively well. So there we go, that's off. Pop this down out the way. Well, that's really gotten out of the way. Right, now obviously you can see that this is cut. You can't because I'm off camera yet again. You can see that this is cut to match the wing shape, so rather than trying to align anything pattern wise, I am just going to use this shape, and I'm cognizant this is possibly not going to be perfect, but it's going to be the easiest way, there we go, to line this up. And once it's in place, just really gently, this film, it's not deadly tacky, but it's tacky enough. It's stickier than Tamiya tape, for example, so just need a little bit of care. Okay. I don't want to strongly burnish it down to the surface, because I will end up pulling paint off when I take it off, and there really isn't any need to do that. So let's take these pieces of extra support out of here, and again being gentle and pulling it back on itself in such a way so as not to just rip all the mask out of position. Now you can tell when this is down on the surface, because it looks like silvering where it's not pressed down all the way. If I just pull a bit up, you see the difference there in the colour. And when I press it down, it does not need to be pressed down any more strongly than that. That is absolutely fine. we go. Now, I already did this stabiliser, and this was for a reason, because this pattern kind of follows on from itself, if that makes sense. So I wanted to make sure. I'm going to have to do some masking of my own back here, because as you can see, the mask doesn't go all the way back on this corner. So I shall fill that in with some tape momentarily. I'm going to peel this area here back, and I'm going to angle it a bit more so that these shapes follow a parallel, I should say. With the control surfaces. The panel lines for these control surfaces, I want them to be parallel to them rather than, there we go, that's better. Okay, now then. That actually does follow on really rather nicely. I'm going to put a piece of masking in here just to make a block that leads onto there. Other than that, that's pretty cool. So I'm just going to use a piece of this tape that's already been used once. I'm not concerned about that in the least. I don't want it to be super tacky anyway. Here's my straight edge. Straight on the bench. You see my bench is in a terrible state. I did think about getting a new cutting mat for people's viewing pleasure, but I think this channel is about actually modelling, so a super clean bench possibly isn't the highest priority. Okay, so that now is the right width piece of tape to match this area that I want to backfill. So I'm going to hold this in place, which is easier said than done because I've already put that angling piece in position. Line that up. Boom. There is also, there it is, a little floater. Grab that off the sheet and pop that in as well. And this is why I've painted essentially the whole wing, because there's just a couple of areas where there's a little extra piece that's away. There we go. Ah! It's on my finger, damn it. There we go. Like so. That one picked itself up with the tape, which is nice. And then just to protect the rest of the finish, I'm going around from underneath and on top actually in a moment. Adding a bit of tape from underneath just to stop any overspray going places that I'd rather it didn't, and besmirching the underside paint like so. And likewise, because the mask is a very, very good fit, but it isn't perfect, just fill in any areas on the top where it doesn't quite cover the edge. That one is a case in point, just there. There we go. And that will adhere to the tape that's been put on from the bottom as well. It's very secure. I do tend to use, with things like this kind of supplementary masking, I will use and reuse my bits of tape until they get to the point where they're just pointless and don't stick anymore. Tamiya tape's not the cheapest, so it makes sense not to waste it unnecessarily. And there we go, that will do for that. You see, I've covered up all the areas. There's no bits of leading edge peeping out, and bear in mind this is a little way from where I'll be spraying anyway. I may well do a bit more supplementary masking, we'll see. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and mask the entire upper surface basically, and I'll show you that before I start painting momentarily. And here it is masked, maybe as much as half an hour later. Yeah, this has just sped the process up so much. I think I said in the first video that I'm confident that masking it is something that I would have been perfectly happy to do. However, this has saved an enormous amount of time. Great big sections, nice and easy to apply. I mean, the shape of the aircraft helps a lot. It's obviously quite slabby, so it's quite easy to put them on, to put them into place, and having them shaped so that you can just sort of line it up with the leading edge and the wingtip and then just smooth it in from there makes all of the difference. The sheet isn't as tacky as some. I have used this style of masking film. In fact, I have a sheet which I sometimes cut my own masks from, and this doesn't seem as tacky, which is a good thing, because that sheet is quite sticky indeed. So that's the main airframe done, and as you can see here I've got the other tail plane and fin ready to go. So in my airbrush, I will turn on my extractor fan in a moment, so oops, things might get a little bit noisy and irritating, but can't be helped. I'll start doing some painting, and I'll talk a bit, and hopefully the video will come out okay. But all we can do is try. So colour wise, as you know, I've got my extra dark sea grey mix in here. This is the Revolution CR, it's a 0.5 needle, nothing too glamorous. And to spray into these masks, it's not rocket science really. Try to keep your airbrush somewhat perpendicular to the part. That will stop, or help to stop, any tendency for paint to get shot under the edge or to creep under the edge. So here we go. So it's not too thin of a mix, it's maybe 50-50 thinners and paint. I wanted the paint thin enough to spray nicely, but thick enough to cover nicely. It's always balancing act. Going such a big colour change as this, I didn't want to be. You don't want to be spraying and spraying and spraying to get the colour to build up, because that's when you're going to start having issues with paint getting under masks and building up of edges and whatnot. Light coat to start with, slightly heavier coat now. Again done. Just one aspect of doing such a big colour change here is that you can, should you choose to, muck about with shading type effects. I'm not really bothering on these parts. Pretty much just spraying it. You can see what looks like shading, but it's really just wetter parts and drier parts. I think it's fair to say the key to success with spraying with masks is to just get that balance between applying a wet enough coat for the paint to stick properly and for the surface to be reasonable, but dry enough that it doesn't want to run up the panel lines and get underneath the mask and give us sloppy edges. There we go. That's those parts complete. Because this paint dries so fast, I'll just quickly demask this. I can see live and here with me whether I've completely failed or not. My tweezers, it's easier. On this one you can see this slither of tape up this edge. That's because the mask for the tail plane, both tail planes, was in one giant piece that went all the way inside and went over this large sort of control surface actuator fairing, and because of that it was difficult to line it up in such a way that the vinyl would stick and that this edge would remain parallel to the rest of it. So I just cut the mask off and used a piece of a thin piece of tape instead. Much easier. And there you go. That is the result. Okay, then here we are, all greyed up. Now I can't remember if I mentioned already with the colour mix. I did base this on H333, which is extra dark sea grey, and I added dark sea grey to lighten it a little. But what I've done since then with the testing on the other parts, I wanted to make it look a little bluer, so I did add some X4. I really like using X4 for mixing as a blue because it's quite a neutral shade, but it's got a really good sort of transparentness about it, which can be really, really useful when tinting colours. Anywho, I've had to put my jumper on because it's freezing with the window open spraying. So I've got the base colour, as you can see, no messing. That is just a straight, get it covered, nice coat of paint. But I wanted to do a little bit of shading for weathering purposes on this occasion. Now I've got a photo with thanks or apologies, whichever is more relevant, to airteamimages.com. I got this off of Google. Get it so that my light isn't in it. I don't know if you can, if it's coming through, but you can sort of see there's a slight patchiness about that finish. I think for the most part that isn't necessarily in reality different shades of the grey so much as different amounts of patina, if you like, to the actual finish. But I'm going to have a crack at somewhat replicating that using shading. I'm going to show you how I'm going to go about that. So I shall prop this up back here so I can look at it as I'm going. Okay, now I've got my airbrush here. I'm going to move this out of the way because I don't want to splash thinners on it at this point. And all I've done is tipped out what was left in it when I finished. Just tipped it out so there's a little bit of that dark blue in there, and I'm going to top that up with some thinners. This is Mr. Colour, and it is I actually have got the levelling stuff at the minute because There wasn't stock of the normal when I bought this. I don't normally use levelling, but it doesn't matter. So that's now a stupidly thin. Let's mix it round. Grab the stuff off the sides of the colour cup. Get it all mixed in. That is now mega thin mix of the original, of this colour that I've made. What I'm going to do is lighten it up a bit. There's a lot of ways you can lighten a colour. Obviously you can add white, but white isn't always the best route, because it bleaches the colour, it desaturates the colour too much in some cases. What I'm going to add on this occasion actually is a bit of the pale blue. That way it lightens it without turning it grey, hopefully. And I'm just going to pop that in a brushful at a time until I've lightened this up a touch. How light you go, it's a matter of personal preference. If you're kind of content that you can control your airbrush well, you don't really have to go all that light. You can just go a couple of shades at a time. Because you can fix it with a blend coat at the end if you need to. So, there we go. A little bit lighter. I'm going to blow air back through that just to mix it, and then chuck a bit out of there. Make sure it's real thin before you start just adding a little more thinners to it. There we go. Very thin. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it helps your airbrush to spray smoothly, to get nice blended feathered edges to what you're painting, and the other is that it makes the paint you're adding more transparent, which gives you more room for error. There are products on the market now deliberately aimed at making paints more transparent so you can build up layers more easily, but to be honest, if you're halfway good with your airbrush, you don't really need to worry about that. So all I'm going to do now is just following or using this picture that I've got on my phone here for inspiration. I'm just going to start adding some paler areas of paint. It's going to be very subtle. You might even only see this as a wet patch at this point. Good old pale panel trick. And this is only, really is only a shade or two lighter than the main colour. There we go then. Hopefully you can see there. I can see it on the screen, so it should be quite obvious when this comes through. There's a whole bunch of lighter patches there. Some of them are panel line related and panel related, and others are not. They're just random blotches of paler colour. As I say, I used the image to help me with some of the placement where I could. Obviously I've only got the one angle, so it's some of it has to be made up. Okay, so you can see there that I've just got quite a lot of fairly random, but not completely random, pale patches. So what I've done now is I've mixed a darker colour. Chuck away the pale colour, that's done with. Here's my darker, and what I've done to mix that is that I've started again with the original mixed blue, and I've added, again, you can darken many ways. You can just add black, of course, but that greys things out just the same as white does. It just greys them out in a dark way. So I actually, on this occasion, have added a touch of X3, which is a much darker blue, and a touch of black, not a lot, and I've ended up with a darker, essentially a darker version of this colour. And again, I'll just start out, show you a little bit of dark shading here. See, there's a fair bit around this panel. Am I on camera? No. There you go, a nice dark patch appearing. This is very, very, very difficult to do, to keep this on camera and be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to show the smallest bit and then continue. And there you go, you see we've got some dark stuff coming. And now the dark's on. Difficult, I know, but you can see, I think, that there's quite a variation in that surface now, but it is still quite subtle. And we're going to make it more subtle still, because the last phase of the operation, if you like, is a blend coat. Now, depending on the result you want to achieve, you may or may not have to do a blend coat at all. If you keep your shading subtle and or your colours subtle, you may find that the effect is quite good and you don't want to blend it at all. But I am going to blend this, and the way to do that is to use a thin mixture, and this time we've got the original colour back in the brush, and it's thinned down around about 80% thinners, 20% paint. It's that thin because obviously doing these kind of dusty light work with the brush, you're going to get a bit of overspray type dusty effects going on, and because of the masking, I can't at this stage really sand it. So I'm going to use this super thin mixture just to help both blend the colours and the finish, just like this. See there, that's a relatively wet layer. I'm not even looking at what it's doing to the colour, I'm literally just watching the finish. If you're super satisfied with your shading route, you could actually use pure thinners to do this. Because that way you can blend the finish without reducing the contrast that you've built into it. But I'm quite happy with what I've done shading wise, so I'm going to do a light coat of this colour, and then I'll get some thinners in the brush and show you what I'm on about. Blow the excess away, and I'll just put pure thinners into my colour cup. As you can see, there's the tiniest bit of paint, but that is just thinners there. I'm going to put the fan on too, so it's going to stink, but simply spray the thinners straight onto the paint. Don't necessarily need to flood it on. Spray it straight on. Especially don't flood it near the edges of the mask, because it will go under. And what that's going to do is in any areas where the paint is a bit dry and dustified, it will melt that dust back into the finish. Just like that. Oh wow, that smells so bad. Here you go then, all done. Blend coat applied, demasked, and looking a bit sweet, if you ask me. I probably didn't mention yet, and shouldn't, I will now. This is pretty much a one-shot deal. This is the masks now. The smaller ones, they will kind of come off in one piece, and they are potentially reusable up to a point, as some of the smaller ones. But in practice, the material stretches when you pull it off the backing sheet initially, and then again when you pull it off the model. So especially with such a complicated demarcation as this, the chances of being able to realign the mask, if you make a mistake, you mess it up and need to touch something up, the chances of being able to realign that mask are so small that I just screwed it up. So if I do need to do any proper touch-ups at any point, and then, you know, it doesn't look too bad to me. There's one or two tiny areas, but nothing that I'm so worried about that I'm going to respray them. It'll just be a case of sorting it out with some tape, cutting it to size and shape, and just spot applying it where necessary. So on to decals then, and I said in the review video that Zvezda decals are generally really good, but this decal sheet consists primarily of some immense walkway decals. Look at the size of that, it's all one piece, which I think honestly is better than the alternative. If this were broken lines, it would be very difficult to apply it nicely. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the number 92 there. Is the decal number. I don't want that on there, and I don't want to cut it out because the cut edges might snag the decals and pull it off. So I'm literally just going to gently scrape that away with my curved scalpel blade. So that's not going to end up getting trapped under the decal. No spurious 92s wanted here, thanks very much. So just dip that in water, just ordinary cold water that I keep in a jar. It's an old pickles jar from Spain. I'll let that soak. I'm not using anything very strong solution wise. My experience with recent Zvezda kits and their decals has been very good, and suggests that they don't need a great deal of help, so I'm just using a bit of Tamiya Mark Fit. I quite like the Mark Fit as it doesn't tend to go around damaging all your paint surfaces too easily. There we go, that decal's free. So putting giant, enormous decals into place can be a bit of a faff, and I thought I'd just show you this one just to show you how I tackled it in this case. Obviously they are quite visible if you mess it up. So I'm lining it up roughly with this control surface edge at the back, just ever so gently bringing it off the backing sheet, so it's already pretty much in position before we even start. In fact, I've won at life there and pretty much got it spot on first time. Just a bit annoying, can I? I'll bring it backwards a little bit and really gently with my fingers. And I say these decals are really nice, but they are incredibly thin. Not only thin, but a little bit stretchy, so if you're pulling them around on the surface too much, they will distort horribly despite their size. So this is a paintbrush which is quite heavily loaded in just plain water from my jar, and I'm just gently pushing some of that moisture out from under the decal just using this paintbrush. And notice at the edge there where I started, I just unfolded that with the paintbrush too. If you start trying to use tweezers to do that sort of thing, you quite quickly get yourself into bother. Piece of kitchen towel and just soak up the huge excess water there at the edge. And then I'll start with the cotton bud Q-tip. And rather than rolling it, I'm very lightly kind of brushing it out, I suppose. Starting from the middle and going towards the edge all the time, but very gently, because I don't want to move the decal. I just want to start persuading the moisture out from underneath it, and always being cognizant of creating wrinkles, or if you do create them, which you will, creating them in such a way that you can push them out. If you were to try to use the rolling motion, which I generally do use with smaller decals, you would find that that would result in a lot of wrinkling. Some of it might become too difficult to remove. So by the time you get to this stage that I'm at now, the majority of the decal is now pretty much in contact with the painted surface. It's not floating on a lake of water and decal solvent anymore. And this end of this cotton bud is thoroughly soaking wet, so I'll get a fresh one. And now, because most of the decal is in touch with the surface, it's much safer to use that rolling motion to really push the air and the water out from underneath now, because the decal isn't just going to slide around on the surface now. And at this point, if you are too rough and you do start to move the decal around, you will ruin it. It will stretch out of shape and there won't be any getting it back. So the key to this with these particular decals, whoever prints them, I don't know, is patience, to be honest. Just keep on working your way around slowly until the decal is pressed firmly into position, which it very much nearly is now. Let's do this last little corner. There. That is very much on. So now what I tend to do, it's all in position, it's all pressed down. Get the mark fit, and I'll just wipe some back over the surface. You can see it's just pooling around, it's not doing a great deal, but I just push that over it again. And then I will just go back over it with this cotton bud again. It's all smoothed out, it's all pressed down. I can see that there's no bubbles under it. And now I'm in no real danger of moving it, so I don't have to be quite as careful. And that's it. Hopefully you can see that is all the way on. There's no wrinkles, there's no tears, there's no creases, and there's no air bubbles. I don't need to use any more solution. As I said, my recent experience with Zvezda decals suggested to me that I wouldn't need to, but I did in fact do the other wing this morning, and it is now dry, and I can show you I did it in exactly the way I've just showed you. And notice how particularly on the fuselage here, that panel detail is completely fine. The decal has sunk into it, no trouble at all. And despite the size of these decals, and in this area the curvature, the various curvatures involved, that process that I just showed you, utilising patience, and I know that's difficult, worked just fine. So there we go, I'll carry on, there are quite a few. Alrighty then, you join me with the model pretty much complete. The decals are all on. That was a bit of a job, there's a lot of them in the end. I've been repaid back fully by Karma for saving so much time on this masking by having to spend a lot of time in a lot of other areas, which we'll look at as I go through this for a few minutes. So as you can see, we're fully decaled now. The model is not only decaled but also has had an initial flat coat. And I say initial because at this stage I'm not 100% sure if I won't put another layer on it. As you can see in the reflections, probably the decals are still quite obvious. not just because of the level difference, which is always going to be there. I'm never going to build up the clear coat to the extent where it will fully hide the thickness of the decals, but also there's a slight finish difference. You can particularly see it in that wing near the star on the left side there. You see how the rectangle area, which is just paint, is kind of shinier than the area that's decal, and that's prevalent throughout. I'm not sure I can live with that. I may well just knock it back a little bit again with some Trizact and chuck another flat coat on it. It will overall look pretty much the same, but hopefully without that slight appearance difference where the decals are. Hopefully you can also see now that the flat coat is on that shading work I did has suddenly popped back into view. It tends to disappear and kind of be blended out when you put a gloss coat on. If you can still see it with a gloss coat on, you know that it's probably less than subtle. But it tends to come back again when you flat coat it for some reason, and hopefully you can see that across the back of the jet here. Underside, very plain. I may yet add a little streakage to the engine areas. Some of the photos of this jet in real life do show a bit of that. There are some slight colour differences here and there, which is deliberate, but it's basically quite plain. So once the decals were on, I clear coated it again to protect said decals, because I wanted to add a bit of panel line wash. Didn't want to go nuts, and I didn't. But I used a product which is new to me, maybe not to some of you, but I happened across a jar of this. This is Tamiya Panel Line Accent Colour, and this is an enamel. Like your Mig and AK washes, the originals, this is an enamel wash. Unlike the more modern generation of ammo washes, which I do love them and I use them all the time, but this is, as you'd expect from Tamiya, is absolutely fit for purpose. It's completely dissolved in solution. Once you put it in a panel line, it doesn't separate out into lots of little dots or anything silly like that. It's got an integral brush in the cap, which is a decent brush actually. It's a nice size for putting into panel lines, and it's a good consistency from the off. It's brilliant, and yes, I will be buying the other colours. We'll see how long it lasts. Hopefully it will last better than the ammo stuff does as well. The black, I wouldn't normally use a black much on a model, to be fair, but I have used it around the wings on these movable controls just to separate them out. It's quite a busy looking area with the digital camo and all the walkways and everything else. I think a more subtle panel line wash may have got a bit lost in amongst all the rest of it. The underside, this blue, black clearly would have been overkill for that, and I've used panel line wash Storm Grey on here, which is a sort of a mucky medium grey colour. Jet nozzle areas, these were painted with a multitude of metallic paints. I used both AK Extreme Metal and God, my brain's deserted me. Alplats also to the nozzles, a mixture of sort of burnt exhaust type colours, and I think they look quite the part. They're sort of mucky looking. I wouldn't, with a Western jet, I wouldn't have them quite as mucky looking as this, but the Russian jets do seem to major on soot deposits, so that's what we have with that, and I think it looks pretty reasonable. Other small parts then, let's just move this beam off to one side for a second. Our selection of rockets. Now there is a watcher on the channel, and hopefully you've all seen his comments in the other videos, who appears to know about these, and he did tell me what these missiles actually are, because instructions don't tell you, which is a little weird, but I've forgotten, so sorry about that. Little rocket, big rocket. This is the Thunderbirds one, or Flash Gordon if you prefer. Now the masking and decaling phase for these two missiles was quite frankly immense. It genuinely took me longer to paint these two missiles than it did the entire model. There's 2 shades of metallic there, 3 shades of grey, the blue pieces and the orange pieces. It's mental. And then there are several decals as well, but they do look very, very cool, in my opinion. There's 2 big rockets, 2 little rockets. You have your undercarriages. I've already fitted the nose wheels. These were painted in LP36, the same as the bays. I did look at photos. In some photos the wheels do look like they might be aluminium, but I don't think they are. I think it's just the light. It's the main leg. I've lost the main wheels, there is somewhere. But tail fins are here. These are all decaled up too, ready to go. Complete with very Minecraft looking digital camo, I think. And then the movable part of the canopy there, which hopefully you can just pretty much see from this how that pale grey lining is visible, as I hoped, now that the masking is off. So all that remains really, I'm going to do some experimentation with these tail fins, see if I don't want to add another flat coat or maybe even a satin coat to the rest of the model before I do final assembly. But essentially we're at the point now, once I've decided what I should do, I'll be adding all those smaller parts to it, and then here's the main one, and then we'll be finished. These again, LP36 with a little bit of a dark wash on, just to pop that detail. I don't want to make them look dirty particularly, just pop the detail a touch. So yeah, I am going to do a bit of experimentation with flat and satin coats on the fins and the tail planes, just see if I can't bring this a bit nearer to what I envisioned, because although there's a nice sheen on this, as you can see, the real aircraft is somewhat glossy, to be fair, so it could go a bit shinier than it is. But yeah, I'll let you know when I come back. But yeah, I shall get on with that and put it together, and the next time we speak on this video will be with some finished shots and some reflection. Alrighty then, here she is, finished. I did not re-flat coat the model in the end. I actually used some Trizact, this exact piece here, and I very gently, with plenty of water, just smoothed down the finish. And once I'd done that, I thought, yeah, that looks okay, I'm going to leave that as it is, because as you can see from this angle, it's kind of flat. It's not what you'd call shiny, but when you put it on an angle you can see that there's a good reflection on it because it's so smooth, and that actually, to me, represents the finish on the real thing fairly well. So I've left it at that. Final assembly, no issues whatsoever, didn't expect any, didn't get any, everything just clipped into place without any issues whatsoever. Nice and easy, big rockets, little rockets, all good. Wheels and tyres, undercarriage, literally all just snapped into place. Transparent parts like the light here on the front and the infrared debris were fitted with ammo acrylic glue, the stodgy stuff. It's like gator grip, really handy for that kind of thing because you can splodge it on with Gay Abandon and it dries clear so it doesn't mar the finish. So there it is. As you can see from my hands, I don't have the biggest hands in the world, but this is not a small model. It is, to be honest, freaking massive. If I get, not a Spitfire here, if I just pop that across it, in fact I'll lay him on there, you can see this is a big jet. Don't buy this if you don't have a fairly decent size storage area for it. So talking about the kit then, quick roundup. I've covered most of these points, but I'll just reiterate now at the end of the video. This is the Zvezda SU-57, kit number 4824. So UK price, I can only speak for the UK, RRP seems to be £39.99, just shy of £40. But it's completely realistic to pick this up for between £30 and £35 at many of the retailers that I've just looked at. What you get for your money, obviously it's a very large model. It is simple, it is simplified. Zvezda have clearly worked, should I say, down to a price rather than up to a detail level. I think that's a fair way to put it. The detail that is included is clear, it's crisp, it's very well moulded, the mould quality is excellent throughout. There's very little in the way of sink marks, mould seams, ejector pin marks, all of that, very minimal. It's very cleanly moulded throughout. very nicely done indeed. The only caveat I would add to that is that surface finish that was on the top half was less than optimal, but I suspect that that is going to vary across kits. You might be lucky and get a smoother one. The fit for the build was spot on. There's really no big issues here whatsoever. A complete beginner could quite happily pick this model up and make a nice job of it. And the detail that is included is reasonable. So quick pros and cons, good points. The intakes and exhausts. I really like what they did with the intakes, the way they've modelled those. I know you can't see down them in the video, but for such a complex shape, they did a really good job of providing a decent representation that wasn't complicated to build. And then the exhaust nozzles, complete with flame rings and afterburners, rear turbine face detail. I think sure they could be better still, but for something included in a kit, I think these are honestly pretty damn good. Likewise, the wheels themselves are really nicely done, and the nose leg's actually really good as well. Balancing that on the negative side, the tyres are quite rubbish. The treads are really ill-defined to the point of not really being there. Wheelbase and cockpit are extremely simplified. The nose wheelbase has no detail in it whatsoever. The main's just a bit of ribbing. The cockpit, again, very basic, empty. Without this quinter set, would look extremely basic. The quinter set is probably really pretty much an essential extra here, unless you fit the pilot. If you fit the pilot, use the decals and close the cockpit. Swings and roundabouts. The made up weapon bay, I mean, obviously that's a limitation. The information really isn't all that readily available. We can accept that because the overall shape's quite good. And the made up weapons fit. So I mentioned earlier in this video, and I've gone and looked up his name, one of my YouTube followers, Gadeshi, has informed me that the big rockets are KH-31 RMD, no PD, these are anti-radar missiles. They aren't Thunderbird 1 and they're not from Flash Gordon, they're anti-radar missiles. The little ones, the small rockets, are R73 infrared short-range air-to-air missiles, so Sidewinder type things. These are incorrect for the aircraft. Apparently it should use R74s, and I'm literally quoting him verbatim because I don't know any better. But I thank him very much for his information, and he's posted a couple of video links in the comments to the other videos showing various details of the aircraft for those that want it. Okay, so painting. I discussed the paint mixes earlier. I think the mask set was just such a boon. I completely understand that some modellers, myself included to a point to be honest, would look at this scheme and think, oh yes, let's do it, take it on, it's a challenge. And as I said in the other videos, I'm perfectly sure I could have achieved a decent result, but it would have taken me probably days of work to do it. The mask set reduced that time to under an hour, honestly. It made it so easy to produce this bonkers paint scheme. It's got to be considered 10 quid well spent if you're going to be airbrushing this model. That was the SX Art mask set number 48055, and I got that from Hannah's. It was £10, but £10 well spent, I think. Decals wise, they're absolutely spot on. I think, dare I say it, the more serious modellers amongst us might want to create masks for these walkway decals and use sprayed on dots instead, because the level differences created by the decals is not entirely welcome, and it's going to be very difficult to get rid of. But from even 2 feet away, that disappears. So pay your money, you take your choice. But they worked beautifully, very little needed in the way of setting solutions or any of that nonsense. I used Tamiya Mark Fit on them only. They conform nicely, they go down nicely. I didn't have any issues with stretching or tearing on this one, so it's all good. So in summary then, for me, I think this is a great kit. I'm I can wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who's, you know, even vaguely interested in this. For me, it was all about the paint scheme. Other people might be more into the jet as a thing. It's not completely accurate. No, we've established that, but it's a great price point for what you get, and a terrifically enjoyable build. I have enjoyed every step of this. It has taken longer than I'd have liked, but that's due to my schedule. It's not down to the kit. I've had very little time to be at the bench for the last several weeks because of work pressures, because I do have a full-time job. So there you go. I'd like to thank very much the hobby company for entrusting me with the build. They are the Zvezda importers, and they're the ones who sent this down via Jonathan Mock at the Interesting Modelling Company. So yeah, thanks very much to them. This, now that it's built, we'll be going back to the Hobby Co, so those of you that frequent UK model shows might get the chance to see it for real at some point. For me, moving forward, we'll be going back to the Tornado now. That'll be the main focus, part 4 on that build. And coming up alongside that, hopefully in the fairly near future, I'll be starting a series of tips and tricks videos. I'm going to call it the Book of Genesis. So maybe yeah, I'm calling it the Book of Genesis, and that will be it won't be in any particular order, but I'll start doing little videos. I'll try and keep them fairly short, just various tips, tricks, tools, etc., and that'll be something we can build on going forward. So until next time, I hope you're all keeping well. Look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.